I request the present day judges, more particularly of the subordinate judiciary and their unofficial counterparts called lawyers, to notice this point and imbibe it and etch it on their DNA. I appeal to bureaucrats, police officials, political leaders, and even the man on the street to imbibe this concept so that we can march towards the rule of law in substance. In form, there is already standard measuring tape. Here it's a measuring scale, though this is made artificially. When I say law, I mean not just the statutes which contain the skeleton of the law, but also binding precedents which contain the flesh and blood over that skeleton. When there is conflict between law and everyone has to starve for lack of food, if you ask a communist, he would say that all land belongs to the entire community, as communism does not believe in private property. The Greek philosopher Plato had wished that for ideal governance, philosophers must become kings, or kings must study philosophy. In the contemporary society, though we have done away with kings, we cannot do away with judges who are given the final say in all matters under the sun. About the relativity of the physical world, a theory of physical relativity. Most of us who have not read the theory of relativity in physics tend to think that our observations of physical phenomena are absolutely true to everybody. The following analysis will show how foolish we all have been on investment and effort. Equity or voice of conscience changes with the foot of the chancellor. In the absence of a standard measuring tape, a tall man may measure the distance of a piece of land with his steps and say that it is 100 feet. A short man may report that it is 200 feet, as the length of his stride is smaller. The same tall man, if he is in a hurry to fall vertically, are fantasies. As Bertrand Russell had remarked, it is obviously possible that what we call a wakeful state may only be an unusual and persistent nightmare. I know that I am not dreaming, but I cannot prove that I am not. Hello, everybody. In continuation of my web series lectures on justice, law, blah, 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 I am now going to address on the second chapter the reality of reality. Why law prevails over voice of conscience to regulate the society. What is real and what is an illusion? What is true and what is false? What is actual and what is imaginary? And similar such questions do arise in the minds of everyone, even with average intelligence. In a court of law, the main business of the functionaries is to decide what is true and what is false. The Greek philosopher Plato had wished that for ideal governance, philosophers must become kings, or kings must study philosophy. In the contemporary society, though we have done away with kings, we cannot do away with judges who are given the final say in all matters under the sun. Judges are supposed to be guided by lawyers. It is therefore absolutely necessary that both must get some introduction to philosophy. The layman also should know why lawyers and judges are essential for a modern democratic society. It is generally agreed by most physicists and debated by philosophers that there is nothing like absolute truth. Even if it is there, it cannot be found out. Truth is relative to the observer. Now, the first aspect of it is about the relativity of the physical world, theory of physical relativity. Most of us who have not read the theory of relativity in physics tend to think that our observations of physical phenomena are absolutely true to everybody. The following analysis will show how foolish we all have been. Let us assume that Mr. A is traveling by train. The train is running at a speed of 100 feet per second. Mr. A, who is traveling in the compartment, climbs onto the uppermost berth and drops a football from the roof of the train to fall vertically on the floor of the train. It takes, say, 1 second for the ball to touch the floor and another second to bounce back to the roof. Assuming that the height of the roof from the floor of the train is 10 feet, Mr. A observes that the ball has traveled 20 feet, that is 10 feet down, 10 feet up, in 2 seconds in a vertical direction. This can be better understood in the video, animated video presentation. Please have a look at it. Let me illustrate this through this animation. In this scene, you are seeing the train in which a passenger is standing. The train is traveling at a speed of 100 feet per second. Suppose the passenger throws the ball downwards by climbing onto the upper berth. The ball reaches the floor by traveling 10 feet distance in 1 second and bounces back to the top of the train in the next second. The traveler notes that the ball has traveled 10 plus 10 feet, that is 20 feet, in 2 seconds in a vertical direction. He does not notice the effect of the forward motion of the train at 100 feet per second, as he is also traveling along with the train at the same speed. In this scene, the same incident is observed in a dramatically different way by another observer who is standing on the platform. He notices that the train also is moving forward and the ball is traveling along with the train at the same speed of 100 feet per second, in addition to the 10 feet from the roof to the floor. So he notices that the distance traveled by the ball from the top of the train to the floor is 110 feet, and on its upward journey while bouncing back 110 feet, and the total distance traveled is 220 feet in 2 seconds. And more importantly, the direction of the travel is not vertical but V-shaped. In this third scenario, the same incident is observed by the traveler in a spaceship in a totally different manner. The space traveler notices that along with the train and the ball in it, the Earth is moving at a tremendous speed of 30 kilometers per second in its orbit around the Sun, and the distance traveled by the ball in 2 seconds is 60 kilometers plus 200 feet, which is the movement of the train. He may not notice the 10 feet distance from the roof of the train to the floor and back, as its proportion is too small in comparison with the 60 kilometers distance traveled in 2 seconds. The most important observation is the ball has traveled in a horizontal direction, which is diametrically opposed to the vertical nature of the travel as observed by the observer in the train in scenario 1 already demonstrated. In this analysis, I am ignoring the additional distance traveled by the train along with the Earth on its own axis, which is 460 meters per second at the equator, and the curved path of travel of the Earth around the Sun, as such details are not required for this limited analysis. By watching the said video, it is clear that different people observe the same physical event in different ways and all are correct, though their perceptions do not agree with one another. This difference is in perception is not merely psychological, it is very much physical. In other words, if we employ a video camera to record its observations from various standpoints, the camera also records the same event differently from different angles of view. Now, let me proceed to explain the psychological or moral relativity. What applies to physics also applies to epistemology or the study of knowledge, psychology, and ethics. So long as we are awake, we believe that whatever we see or hear or smell or touch or taste is real. Once we fall asleep and start dreaming, we believe that our perceptions in that state of dream also are real, so long as the dream lasts. When there is a nightmare, that is a frightening dream, we get up suddenly yelling or crying. We cannot give any irrefutable reasons to prove that what we perceive in the wakeful state are really real and what we see in a state of dream are fantasies. As Bertrand Russell had remarked, it is obviously possible that what we call a wakeful state may only be an unusual and persistent nightmare. I know that I am not dreaming, but I cannot prove that I am not. Gaudapada, who was referred to as teacher's teacher by Adi Shankaracharya himself, had doubted the reality of things seen in a wakeful state as different from things seen in a state of dream. He initiated his disciple Adi Shankaracharya to expound his Mithyavada philosophy, which is too well known to be stated by me. But for the uninitiated, it means that the whole universe as we perceive it is actually an illusion. It is not really there, but hoodwinks us to be in a delusion that it is there. It is true that our perceptions in a wakeful state are more consistent and uniform, while our dream state perceptions are erratic. But who told us that consistency is an integral part of reality? There is the tale of the Brahmin who abandoned his goat in a forest because three persons who were thieves falsely but consistently misled him to make him believe that what he was carrying was not a goat but a dog or a donkey or a dead animal which he was not supposed to touch. Please see this sample of a short video.
Proves. One day a Brahmin named Shastri received a goat as a gift. He picked up the goat and set out for home, carrying it on his shoulders.
I advise the audience to watch the above video, which cannot be shown to you in full, as it might amount to violating copyright of the creator of the video. It is available on the YouTube, and the title is Brahmin and Three Crooks. If we think that what appears to be consistent over a period of time is true, it may facilitate our dealing with it in the way we like, but it as we have no right to suppose that whatever induces us to respond or to act or react is real. The best example is a motion picture in which we as audience laugh, cry, get angry, get excited, even aroused by watching certain adult movies. With the onset of 2D, 3D, and multi-D movies, we might even experience the corresponding fragrance of a flower, and we feel that we are actually touching such a flower. But we are also aware that all the scenes in the movie, its actors, directors, and singers in the movie are actually not there in the cinema hall. In fact, quite a few of them might have even been dead and gone. Therefore, we cannot conclude that whatever produces an effect upon us is the evidence of reality. It is also true that in a wakeful state, we employ our senses to perceive, we should but why should we suppose that only sense perceptions are real? We cannot see infrared rays, nor can we hear radio or ultrasonic waves directly. But it means that such things do not exist. Does it mean that such things do not exist? Similarly, can a totally deaf man conclude that sound is unreal and a blind man presume that light is a fiction? As Russell remarked, it is naive realism that leads to physics. Conscience, how it varies from person to person. Most of us think that dictates of our conscience must be true. Let us examine it more deeply. If you ask a devout Muslim to spell out the most conscionable rate of interest on a loan, he would say that it is 0%, as Islam prohibits charging any interest. His conscience is molded by his religion. A Shylock might say that even cent% interest is reasonable, as he is, after all, taking great risk in entrusting the principal amount to the loanee. If you ask a saint like Purandara Dasa or Tyagaraja about the ownership of a piece of land, he would say, all land belongs to God. But this will not solve our problem, as God never bothers to cultivate land and grow crops unless this dispute of ownership is settled. No person would venture to cultivate the land, and everyone has to starve for lack of food. If you ask a communist, he would say that all land belongs to the entire community, as communism does not believe in private property. But this experiment with communal ownership also failed in Russia and China, as for want of incentive to produce, food production fell drastically. Communism was abandoned in Russia and China precisely for this reason. Out of desperation, if you ask a street rowdy to settle the dispute, he would proclaim that all land belongs to himself as he wields muscle power. No one would risk investing in such a society where there is no predictability of returns on investment and effort. Equity or voice of conscience changes with the foot of the chancellor. In the absence of a standard measuring tape, a tall man may measure the distance of a piece of land with his steps and say that it is 100 feet. A short man may report that it is 200 feet, as the length of his stride is smaller. The same tall man, if he is in a hurry to catch a train, may make may take long strides and say that the distance is only 50 feet, and jaywalking, he may find that it is 125 feet. Since equity or voice of conscience cannot be relied upon to judge the affairs of people, law is adopted as a standard measuring tape. Here it's a measuring scale, though this is made artificially. When I say law, I mean not just the statutes which contain the skeleton of the law, but also binding precedents which contain the flesh and blood over that skeleton. When there is conflict between law and equity, law will prevail. Equity can be taken only to supplement the law and cannot supplant the law. Open quote, the law is hard, but it is the law, close quote, is the Latin maxim. So this was quoted with approval by the Honorable Supreme Court of India in a decision reported in 2006 Supreme Court Weekly 6447. I request the present day judges, more particularly of the subordinate judiciary and their unofficial counterparts called lawyers, to notice this point and imbibe it and etch it on their DNA. I appeal to bureaucrats, police officials, political leaders, and even the man on the street to imbibe this concept so that we can march towards the rule of law in substance too. Though in form, there is already rule of law in India. Section 3 of the Evidence Act arbitrarily and artificially, though out of necessity, presumes that only perceptions through senses are true. The section reads, open quote, fact means and includes anything, state of things, or relation of things capable of being perceived by the senses. And, open quote, any mental condition of which any person is conscious. This implies that the dream state perceptions are not admissible in evidence. These presumptions are for convenience and are very useful. Otherwise, a witness might depose that he dreamt that the accused killed the victim and his dream could also be true. Can the judge accept such an argument? Under the Land Encroachment Act, we start with the legal presumption that all land belongs to the state government. Individuals who encroach upon public land for 30 years, formerly it was 60 years, prescribe their right by adverse possession. A private citizen has to encroach upon such land for 12 years to perfect his title by adverse possession. One can get an easementary right of enjoyment after he enjoys for 20 years by prescription. Though there is no mystical sanctity to the number of years prescribed by law, and it is stipulated only arbitrarily, the lawyers and judges should not ignore the law and invoke their own equities or voices of conscience or gut feeling to judge the affairs of fellow mortals. Conscience per se is an anarchic force upon which no system of government can be built. Clearly, conscience doesn't always declare the will of God, for if it did, such diversities would be impossible. Unquote. This is said by Bertrand Russell. Lawyers and judges are not freelance thinkers, but are enjoined to do structured thinking by applying the yardstick called law. Judges are non practicing lawyers, as their license to practice is kept in abeyance on their request, while lawyers are non official judges. Now, there are no gods and priests and devotees in a court of law. So, this is to be remembered. I'll advert to it while dealing with another chapter. If a law is bad, it may be amended or repealed or struck down as unconstitutional by the judiciary, as the constitution is the supreme law of the land. Without doing that, if one should not ignore the law on one's own moral considerations and emotional inclinations. This should be kept in mind by lawyers when diagnosing their cases and the judges when giving their formal judgments. That is why I compare law to a railway track. Deviation from the track, even by a few inches, would result in derailment of the judicial trains, rendering justice a gamble on the psychology of the judges. Nowadays, that is what is happening, especially in the trial courts. Though physical phenomena are observed differently from different points of view, as seen in the earlier example of the railway compartment, if all observers see the football from the railway compartment, all will get the same result. Similarly, if all officials, police officials, political leaders, lawyers, and judges view social problems and questions from the point of law, all would come to the same conclusion. This will lead to avoidance of conflicts in a society to a great extent. Then the most important benefit of the rule of law is rule of law paves the way for predictability of judgments. From predictability comes planability of transactions by citizens, and citizens can avoid litigation from proper planning. If litigation is thrust upon them by wrongdoers, they can be sure to win such cases instead of gambling on the psychology of judges. This is explained in detail in the next video. Thank you.